bride left by millionaire, and years later he sees her with quadruplets and takes her to court. The soft amber glow of the hotel suite did little to calm Samantha Blake's nerves as she stood before the full-length mirror, adjusting her lace veil for what felt like the 100th time. Her wedding gown shimmered in the light, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions brewing within her. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second bringing her closer to what should have been the happiest moment of her life. At 11:30 a.m., only 30 minutes until the ceremony was set to begin, Samantha's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and nerves as she smoothed down the front of her dress, her fingers trembling slightly. This was it. In less than an hour she would become Mrs. Jonathan Carter, wife to the wealthiest man in Boston. It was a fairy tale come true, a dream she had scarcely allowed herself to imagine. But then the silence of the room was shattered by the shrill ring of her phone. Samantha's heart skipped a beat as she turned to answer it, a smile still playing on her lips. "Hello," she said softly, her voice quivering with anticipation. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. And then Jonathan's voice came through, cold and distant, like a winter wind cutting through her joy. "I'm not coming." 3 words, 3 simple words that crashed into Samantha's like a wrecking ball, shattering everything she thought she knew. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor as she stared blankly at her reflection. A bride without a groom, a love story without its happy ending. In that moment, as the clock continued its merciless ticking, Samantha didn't know that this wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the beginning of a battle she never saw coming. Samantha Blake had always been a dreamer, a trait that both her parents admired and worried about in equal measure. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in suburban Boston, she was the kind of girl who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. Her childhood bedroom was adorned with posters of princesses and castles, a stark contrast to the practical, no-nonsense world her parents inhabited. It was this dreamer's spirit that first drew Jonathan Carter's attention. They met at a charity gala where Samantha, fresh out of college, was working as an event coordinator. Jonathan, already a rising star in Boston's business world at 28, was immediately captivated by her warmth and infectious optimism. Jonathan Carter was everything Samantha had ever dreamed of: handsome, successful, and seemingly kind. The son of old money, he had taken his family's fortune and multiplied it tenfold through savvy investments and a cutthroat business acumen. To the outside world, he was the golden boy of Boston's elite, a modern-day Prince Charming. Their whirlwind romance was the talk of the town. Samantha, with her public school education and modest background, was thrust into a world of opulence and luxury she had only ever imagined. Designer dresses replaced her off-the-rack clothes, and 5-star restaurants became her regular haunts. But it was intoxicating, and Samantha found herself swept away by it all. But beneath the glittering surface there were cracks in their fairy tale, and Jonathan's work always came first, and Samantha often found herself alone in their sprawling penthouse, waiting for him to return from late-night meetings or international business trips. When she expressed her loneliness, he would shower her with expensive gifts, a strategy that worked initially but slowly began to lose its charm. Despite these issues, Samantha clung to her belief in their love. She was certain that once they were married, things would change. Jonathan would prioritize their life together, and they would build the family she had always dreamed of. As the wedding approached, Samantha threw herself into the planning, determined to create the perfect day. No expense was spared. The venue was a historic mansion overlooking the Atlantic, the guest list a who's who of Boston's elite, and her dress a custom creation from a world-renowned designer. In her excitement, Samantha failed to notice the growing distance between her and Jonathan. His smiles became rarer, his kisses more perfunctory. When she talked about their future children, he would change the subject, steering the conversation back to his latest business venture. On the periphery of their life together was Vivian Caldwell, Jonathan's colleague and childhood friend. Tall, elegant, and sharp-tongued, Vivian was everything Samantha was not. Where Samantha was soft and nurturing, Vivian was hard-edged and ambitious. The two women circled each other warily at social events, their conversations laced with barbed compliments and veiled insults. Samantha tried to ignore the lingering gazes between Jonathan and Vivian, the inside jokes she wasn't privy to. She told herself it was nothing, that Jonathan had chosen her, was marrying her. But in the quiet moments, doubt would creep in, whispering insidiously in her ear. Another key figure in Samantha's life was her best friend, Rachel Martinez. A fiery public defender with a no-nonsense attitude, Rachel had been skeptical of Jonathan from the start. "He's too perfect," she would say, her dark eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Nobody's that perfect without hiding something." Samantha would laugh off her concerns, accusing Rachel of being too cynical. But Rachel's words would echo in her mind during those long nights alone in the penthouse. As the wedding day drew nearer, Samantha's parents watched their daughter's transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. They were thrilled that she had found happiness, but worried about the drastic changes in her life. "Just remember who you are, sweetheart," her mother would say, squeezing her hand. "All the money in the world isn't worth losing yourself." So the day before the wedding, Samantha's father pulled her aside. His weathered face was serious as he spoke, his voice gruff with emotion. "I know you love him, Pumpkin," he said, using the childhood nickname that always made her smile. "But are you sure this is what you want? Marriage isn't just about love. It's about partnership, respect, and sharing the same values. Does Jonathan share your values?" Samantha had bristled at his words, insisting that he didn't understand Jonathan the way she did. He did. But as she stood alone in that hotel room, his phone call still ringing in her ears, her father's words came back to her with painful clarity. The sound of the door opening jolted Samantha from her shocked stupor. Rachel burst in, already dressed in a maid-of-honor gown, her face flushed with excitement. "Sam, you won't believe the crowd outside. It's like the whole of Boston has turned up to." She stopped short, taking in Samantha's pale face and the phone on the floor. "What happened?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Samantha opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, a sob escaped her lips, and suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Rachel was at her side in an instant, arms wrapping around her friend, as Samantha's perfectly applied makeup streamed down her face. Between sobs, Samantha managed to choke out Jonathan's words. Rachel's face hardened, a mix of fury and vindication flashing in her eyes. "That bastard," she hissed. "I'll kill him." As Rachel held her, murmuring soothing words and promises of retribution, Samantha's mind raced. But what would she tell everyone? How could she face the pity, the gossip, the humiliation? And beneath it all, a deeper, more terrifying thought began to take root. What would she do now? Her entire future, all her dreams and plans, had been built around Jonathan. Without him, who was she? Little did Samantha know, as she stood there in a ruined wedding dress, that this moment of despair was not the end of her story, but the beginning. The path ahead would be harder than anything she had ever imagined, filled with challenges that would test her to her very core. But it would also lead her to a strength she never knew she possessed, and a love deeper and more profound than any fairy tale. The weeks following the wedding disaster passed in a blur for Samantha. She moved out of Jonathan's penthouse, unable to bear the memories that haunted every corner. Rachel insisted she stay with her, turning her small spare room into a sanctuary for her heartbroken friend. Samantha was grateful, but she felt like a shadow of herself, drifting through days that seemed endless and meaningless. It was on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 month after the non-wedding, that Samantha's world shifted on its axis once again. She sat on the cold tile of Rachel's bathroom, staring down at a small plastic stick, her hands trembling as she watched a second line slowly appear. "Pregnant. Claim it." Her heart dropped, and then the shock turned to something else. Panic, confusion, and beneath it all, a tiny flicker of hope. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach, her mind reeling with the implications. She couldn't call Jonathan. She wouldn't, not after what he'd done, after how easily he'd walked away without a backward glance. There was no way she would let him back into her life. He didn't deserve to know. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Samantha's small frame swelled with life. 4 lives, as it turned out. The day she learned she was carrying quadruplets, she laughed until she cried, and then cried until she laughed again. It was absurd, terrifying, and somehow perfect. "How am I going to do this?" she whispered one night, cradling her growing belly as she sat in the darkened room of her tiny new apartment. She had moved out of Rachel's place, determined to stand on her own 2 feet. The apartment was a far cry from the luxury she had grown accustomed to, but it was hers, free from Jonathan's shadow. Despite her fears, Samantha felt a strength growing inside her, matching the growth of her babies. She worked 2 jobs, piecing together a life for herself and her children. By day, she worked as a receptionist at a small marketing firm. By night, she freelanced as a virtual event planner, squeezing in work after her shift ended. The pregnancy was hard. 4 babies took their toll on her body, and there were days when she could barely get out of bed. But she persevered, driven by a love she had never experienced before. Each flutter, each kick reminded her of the precious lives she carried. As her due date approached, Samantha prepared as best she could. She scoured thrift stores and online marketplaces for second-hand baby items, determined to provide for her children despite her limited means. Rachel and her parents rallied around her, helping to transform the small apartment into a cozy nest for the impending arrivals. The birth was a blur of pain, fear, and ultimately overwhelming joy. Jack, James, Jake, and Jesse entered the world within minutes of each other, their cries a chorus that brought tears to Samantha's eyes. As she held them, marveling at their tiny fingers and toes, she made a silent promise. She would give them everything, be everything they needed. They would never know the pain of abandonment that she had experienced. The first few months were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and moments of pure, unadulterated love. Samantha was exhausted beyond anything she had ever known, but she had never been happier. Each smile, each coo from her boys, filled her heart with a joy she hadn't thought possible after Jonathan's betrayal. As the boys grew, so did Samantha's resolve. Every milestone, every first word, every giggle, every step strengthened her belief that she'd made the right choice. Jonathan would never be part of their lives. He didn't deserve to be. The boys had Jonathan's piercing blue eyes and his sandy blonde hair. Strangers would stop her on the street and comment on how identical they looked, how striking their resemblance was. And every time, Samantha's heart would ache just a little. It was as if Jonathan was there in every smile, every mischievous glance. But Samantha pushed through the pain, focusing instead on the joy her sons brought her. She was determined to give them the life they deserved, no matter the cost to herself. Little did she know, as she watched her boys take their first tentative steps across the living room floor, that her battle was far from over. The past she had tried so hard to leave behind was about to catch up with her, bringing with it challenges that would test her in ways she never imagined. As we pause in our story, dear viewers, remember that life, like this tale, is full of unexpected twists and turns. To ensure you don't miss the next chapter in Samantha's journey, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing you these touching stories of resilience and love. As the years passed, Samantha settled into a routine that, while challenging, brought her a sense of purpose and joy she had never known before. By the time the boys turned 3, she had found a delicate balance between work and motherhood, though it often felt like walking a tightrope without a safety net. Her day started before dawn, preparing bottles and changing diapers in the dim light of early morning. She dressed the boys, each in a different color to tell them apart: Jack in blue, James in green, Jake in red, and Jesse in yellow. It was a small thing, but it helped her maintain some semblance of order in the cheerful chaos of raising quadruplets. By 7 a.m., she dropped the boys off at a nearby daycare run by Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind-hearted grandmother who had taken a shine to Samantha and her brood. "You're doing good, Mia," Mrs. Rodriguez would say every morning, her weathered hand squeezing Samantha's shoulders reassuringly. "Those boys are lucky to have you." Samantha would then rush to her job at the marketing firm where she had slowly worked her way up from receptionist as junior account manager. Her boss, a stern woman named Victoria, had initially been skeptical about hiring a single mother of 4. "I need someone reliable," she had said during the interview, eyeing Samantha with barely concealed doubt. But Samantha had proved her wrong, consistently going above and beyond, often working through her lunch breaks to ensure all her tasks were completed. Evenings were a whirlwind of picking up the boys, preparing dinner, bath time and bedtime stories. It was exhausting, but Samantha cherished these moments. Sitting on the worn couch, a boy tucked under each arm and 2 on her lap, reading their favorite stories over and over, she felt a contentment that made all the struggles worthwhile. Once the boys were asleep, Samantha would open her laptop, diving into her freelance work. She had built up a small but loyal client base for her virtual event planning services, and the extra income was crucial for making ends meet. Many nights, she worked until her eyes burned from staring at the screen, only crawling into bed for a few hours of sleep before starting the cycle all over again. Money was always tight. Samantha budgeted meticulously, cutting coupons and shopping sales, but there were still months when she had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying new shoes for the boys' growing feet. In these moments, she would think of Jonathan, of the life of luxury she had left behind, and a part of her would ache with regret and anger. But then one of the boys would toddle up to her, arms raised for a hug, and those feelings would melt away, replaced by a fierce determination to provide for her children, no matter the cost. Despite the financial strain, Samantha was determined to give her boys every opportunity she could. She enrolled them in a local community center's youth program, which offered affordable after-school activities. Jack and James took to soccer like fish to water, their natural athleticism shining through as they raced across the field. Jake showed an early aptitude for music, banging away happily on a second-hand keyboard Samantha had found at a garage sale. And Jesse, the quietest of the 4, revealed a talent for art, his crayon drawings covering the refrigerator and walls of their small apartment. It was during one of these community center events, a sunny afternoon when the boys were playing in a local park, that Samantha's carefully constructed world began to shift once again. The boys were on the swings, their laughter ringing through the air, when Samantha felt a prickle of awareness at the back of her neck. She turned, her breath catching in her throat. Standing just a few feet away, watching her boys with an expression she couldn't quite read, was Jonathan. The world seemed to narrow to just the 2 of them. He looked different, older, sharper. His suit was immaculate, his hair neatly combed back. But there was something in his eyes, something vulnerable and raw, that she had never seen before. "Samantha," he murmured, taking a hesitant step forward. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. She instinctively moved in front of the quadruplets, shielding them with her body. Jonathan's gaze shifted to the 4 boys, his face paling. "Are they?" He couldn't finish the question, but Samantha saw the moment the realization hit him. His mouth dropped open slightly, and for a second, he looked like a man completely lost. "They're not yours," Samantha lied, the words spilling out before she could stop them. But Jonathan wasn't fooled. She could see it in his eyes, the way they darted between her and the boys, taking in every detail, every familiar trait. He took another step closer, his hands clenched at his sides. "Samantha, I need to know," he pleaded, his voice low and urgent. Are they mine?" She lifted her chin, fighting to keep her expression blank. "It doesn't matter, Jonathan. You made your choice years ago. We don't need you." And then she turned, calling out to the boys in a bright, shaky voice, "Come on, guys. It's time to go home." They ran to her, their little hands reaching up to grab hers. Jonathan stood frozen, his gaze following them as they walked away. And as Samantha glanced back over her shoulder, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Determination. He wasn't going to let them go. 2 weeks later, Jonathan showed up at her apartment. This time he wasn't alone. He brought a lawyer. Samantha's heart sank as she read the papers he thrust into her hands. "Custody," she whispered, staring up at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I am," he replied quietly. "Samantha, I made a mistake. I know that now. But those boys, they deserve to know who their father is. I deserve a chance to be part of their lives." Her hands shook as she crumpled the papers. "You don't get to walk back into my life after everything you've done. After abandoning us." "I never knew," he shot back, his voice breaking. "I never knew about them, Samantha, because you never gave me a chance." "You left Jonathan," she shouted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "You left me with nothing, no money, no home, and 4 babies to raise alone." He flinched, but his expression hardened. "I'm not leaving again." The next few months were a blur of courtrooms and lawyers. Jonathan, true to his word, refused to back down. He showed up to every hearing, every meeting, fighting to prove he was serious about being in the boys' lives. And slowly, agonizingly, Samantha began to believe him. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, and as the tension between them simmered, Samantha couldn't help but wonder, was he really here for the boys? Or was this just another one of his power plays? The boys, too young to understand the intricacies of the custody arrangement, simply knew that suddenly they had a father. A father who was a stranger, but who looked just like them. Jonathan tried, Samantha had to admit. He picked them up every weekend, took them to the zoo, to sports games, to amusement parks. He made an effort to learn about their favorite things: Jesse's obsession with drawing, Jake's love for music, and Jack and James' fascination with soccer. But no matter how hard he tried, there was always an undercurrent of awkwardness, a stiffness in his interactions that the boys picked up on. And every time Samantha watched him try to connect, a small part of her still felt that same sharp sting of betrayal. "I'm their father," he told her one evening as he dropped the boys off, his voice soft but firm. "They deserve to know me." "I know," Samantha replied, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "But they're confused, Jonathan. You can't just walk into their lives and expect them to accept you right away." His expression tightened. "What do you want me to do, Samantha? I'm doing everything I can." "Be patient," she whispered, glancing over at the boys who were sitting on the living room floor, completely absorbed in building a block tower. "And for God's sake, get Vivian out of the picture. She's confusing them even more." Jonathan's face hardened at the mention of Vivian. "Vivian is my fiancée. She's going to be part of their lives whether you like it or not." The words cut deep and Samantha struggled to keep her expression neutral. "You're going to have to choose, Jonathan," she said quietly, "between making your fiancé happy and doing what's best for our sons." He stared at her, something like regret flickering in his eyes, but then he turned away, shaking his head. "I'm not choosing," he murmured. "I'll make it work." But Samantha knew better. Vivian was a ticking time bomb, and sooner or later she would go off. And it happened on a rainy Friday evening. Samantha was rushing to get the boys ready for Jonathan's weekend visitation, their little rain boots scattered across the floor as they tugged on their jackets. There was a knock on the door, and when Samantha opened it, she found Vivian standing there, dressed in a pristine white trench coat, an umbrella held over her head. "Where's Jonathan?" Samantha asked, her voice wary. "He's not coming," Vivian replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "He asked me to pick up the boys today." Samantha stiffened, her gaze darting to her sons who had frozen at the sight of Vivian. Jesse took a step back, clutching Jack's arm, and Jake shrank behind Samantha's leg, peeking out at Vivian with wide eyes. "No," Samantha said firmly, "you're not taking them." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "I'm not asking for your permission." Samantha squared her shoulders, blocking Vivian's path. "Get out of my house." "You think you can keep me out of their lives forever?" Vivian spat, her face twisting with anger. "I'm going to be their stepmother. They will be part of my family." "No, they won't," Samantha retorted, "because they're my family, and I'm not going to let you manipulate Jonathan into." "That's rich coming from you," Vivian sneered. "You think you can just dangle these kids in front of him and forget about me, about us. Jonathan and I are getting married, and when we do, I'm going to make sure you never get another penny of his money." The accusation stunned Samantha into silence. She had never asked for money, had never taken a single cent from Jonathan, not when she was pregnant, not after the boys were born. The very idea that she would use her children for leverage made her blood boil. "This isn't about money," Samantha ground out, fighting to keep her voice steady. "This is about what's best for the boys, and what's best is for you to stay away from them." Vivian's lips curled into a cold smile. "You don't get it, do you? You're going to lose. Jonathan's going to realize that I'm the only one who really cares about his future, about our future. And when he does, he'll take those boys away from you." "Over my dead body," Samantha whispered. Vivian's smile widened. "That can be arranged." Before Samantha could respond, there was a cry from behind her. She spun around to see Jesse staring up at Vivian, his little face crumpling. "Go away," he shouted, his voice high and shrill. "You're mean. I don't like you." Samantha reached out, but he was already running toward his brothers, his eyes wet with tears. Vivian's smile vanished, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Leave," Samantha said, stepping between her and the boys. "Now?" For a moment they stood there, the tension thick and crackling. Then, with a toss of her hair, Vivian turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Samantha let out a shaky breath, her heart racing. She knelt down, pulling the boys into her arms, holding them tight as they trembled against her. "It's okay, babies," she whispered, stroking their hair. "Mommy's here. Mommy's got you." But as she sat there, cradling her sons, a single terrifying thought lodged itself in her mind. Vivian wasn't going to stop, and Samantha wasn't sure she could protect her boys from whatever was coming next. That night, after she had finally calmed the boys and put them to bed, Samantha sat alone in her tiny kitchen, a cup of cold coffee clutched in her hands. The encounter with Vivian had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. For the first time since she had decided to raise the boys on her own, Samantha felt truly afraid. She thought about calling Jonathan, about telling him what had happened, but what would that accomplish? He had made it clear that Vivian was a part of his life, a part he wasn't willing to give up. And Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that if push came to shove, Jonathan would choose Vivian over his own children. As the night wore on, Samantha made a decision. She wouldn't let Vivian or Jonathan or anyone else threaten her family. She had raised these boys on her own for 3 years, had loved them and protected them with everything she had. She wouldn't stop now. With a newfound determination, Samantha reached for her phone. It was time to call Rachel. She needed a lawyer, someone who would fight for her and her boys with the same fierce dedication she had shown all these years. The battle for her children's future was just beginning, and Samantha was ready to fight with everything she had. As she dialed Rachel's number, Samantha glanced at the photos of her boys that covered the refrigerator. Their smiling faces, so innocent and trusting, strengthened her resolve. No matter what it took, no matter what she had to sacrifice, she would keep them safe. They were her world, her reason for living, and she would move heaven and earth to protect them. The line connected, and Rachel's sleepy voice came through. "Sam, what's wrong?" Samantha took a deep breath, steeling herself for the battle ahead. "I need your help, Rachel. It's time to fight back." Jonathan's feet pounded the pavement, his breath coming in short gasps as he pushed himself through his morning run. It had become a ritual for him, a way to clear his head before diving into the cutthroat world of corporate finance. But today, something felt different. The usual calm that settled over him during these runs was elusive, replaced by a nagging sense of unease. As he rounded the corner into the local park, a familiar sound caught his attention. Children's laughter, high and clear, rang out across the playground. Jonathan slowed his pace, his eyes drawn to the source of the joyful noise. And then he saw her. Samantha stood by the swings, her hair caught in the breeze, a soft smile playing on her lips as she watched 4 young boys racing around the playground. Jonathan felt his heart stutter in his chest. She looked different, older, more mature, with a quiet strength that hadn't been there before, but it was undeniably her. He found himself moving closer, drawn by an invisible force he couldn't resist. As he approached, Samantha turned, her eyes widening in recognition. The smile vanished from her face, replaced by a look of shock and something else, fear. "Samantha," he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't respond, her body tensing as if preparing for a fight. Jonathan's gaze moved past her to the boys, and he felt the world tilt on its axis. They were the spitting image of him at that age, the same sandy blonde hair, the same piercing blue eyes. His mind raced doing the math. It had been just over 4 years since he'd left Samantha at an altar. These boys looked to be about 3. Are they? He couldn't finish the sentence. The implications too overwhelming to voice. "They're not yours," Samantha said quickly, but Jonathan could see the lie in her eyes. He had always been able to read her, even now after all this time. The truth crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had children. 4 of them. Sons he had never known about, never seen grow, never held. The magnitude of what he had missed threatened to bring him to his knees. "Samantha, please," he said, taking a step closer. "We need to talk about this." But Samantha was already gathering the boys, her voice high and strained as she called them to her. "It's time to go home, sweethearts," she said, not meeting Jonathan's eyes. He watched helplessly as she hurried away, the 4 little boys trailing after her like ducklings, his sons. The thought echoed in his mind, a revelation that shook him to his core. As they disappeared from view, Jonathan made a decision. He couldn't let them go, not again, not now that he knew. The next few weeks passed in a blur of frantic activity. Jonathan threw himself into research, consulting with lawyers and child psychologists, trying to understand his rights and responsibilities. The more he learned, the more determined he became to be a part of his children's lives. But Samantha was equally determined to keep him away. She refused his calls, ignored his messages, and when he showed up at her apartment, she threatened to call the police. It was Vivian who finally convinced him to take legal action. "You're their father, Jonathan," she said, her voice firm. "You have rights. If she won't listen to reason, then you need to make her listen." And so, on a crisp autumn morning, Jonathan found himself standing outside Side's door, a lawyer at his side and custody papers in his hand. When Samantha opened the door, her face a mask of wary hostility, he felt a pang of regret for what he was about to do. But he pushed it aside. This was about his children, about being the father they deserved. "What is this?" Samantha asked, her voice trembling as she looked at the papers he handed her. "I'm filing for joint custody," Jonathan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "They're my sons, Samantha. I have a right to be in their lives." The color drained from Samantha's face. "You can't do this," she whispered. "You can't just walk back into our lives after all this time and expect—" "I didn't know," Jonathan interrupted, his frustration boiling over. "How was I supposed to know I had children if you never told me?" Samantha's eyes flashed with anger. "You left me, Jonathan. You left me alone and pregnant. You don't get to play the victim here." The words hit Jonathan like a physical blow. He knew she was right, knew that his actions had set all of this in motion, but he couldn't change the past. All he could do was try to make things right now. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I know I hurt you. I know I made mistakes. But please, Samantha, don't punish our boys for my failings. They deserve to know their father." For a moment he thought he saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but then it was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. "I'll see you in court," she said, and slammed the door in his face. As Jonathan walked away, he felt a mix of emotions churning inside him. Guilt for the pain he had caused, anger at being kept in the dark for so long, and an overwhelming desire to know his sons. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with legal battles and emotional confrontations, but he was prepared to fight. For the first time in his life, Jonathan Carter had found something worth fighting for. The custody battle that followed was brutal. Both sides dug in their heels, unwilling to compromise. Jonathan's lawyers painted Samantha as an unstable single mother, struggling to provide for 4 children on a meager income. They argued that the boys would have a better life with Jonathan, with access to the best schools, the best healthcare, the best of everything. Samantha's team, led by her fiery friend Rachel, countered by portraying Jonathan as an absentee father who showed no interest in his children for the first 3 years of their lives. They emphasized Samantha's dedication, her sacrifices, and the strong bond she had formed with her sons. The boys, too young to fully understand what was happening, were caught in the middle. They were subjected to interviews with child psychologists, observed during supervised visits with Jonathan, and shuttled back and forth between their parents' homes. Ennui. As the weeks turned into months, the toll on everyone became increasingly apparent. Samantha looked worn and haggard, the stress etching lines on her once youthful face. Jonathan, used to winning at everything he set his mind to, found himself floundering in this unfamiliar territory where his wealth and influence seemed to count for little. And through it all, Vivian hovered on the periphery, a constant presence that only served to heighten the tension. The cutting remarks and thinly veiled threats towards Samantha did little to help Jonathan's case, despite his repeated requests for her to stay out of it. "I'm trying to build a relationship with my children," he told her one night, frustration evident in his voice. "Your antagonizing Samantha isn't helping." Vivian's eyes flashed dangerously. "I'm protecting our future, Jonathan. Or have you forgotten about our plans in your rush to play happy families with your ex?" The words stung, reminding Jonathan of the delicate balancing act he was attempting. He loved Vivian, or at least he thought he did. She had been a constant in his life for years, supporting him through the ups and downs of his career. But now, faced with the reality of his children, he found himself questioning everything. As the court date loomed closer, Jonathan made one last attempt at reconciliation. He asked Samantha to meet him at a neutral location, a quiet cafe where they had once spent hours talking about their dreams for the future. Samantha arrived looking guarded, her body language screaming defensiveness, but she sat down across from him, her eyes meeting his with a challenge. "What do you want, Jonathan?" she asked, her voice weary. "I want us to find a way to make this work," he said, leaning forward. "For the boys' sake. This fighting, it's not good for them." Samantha's laugh was bitter. "And whose fault is that? You're the one who started this whole mess." "I know," Jonathan admitted, surprising himself with his candor. "I made a terrible mistake 4 years ago. I was scared, Samantha. Scared of commitment. Scared of not living up to my family's expectations. But I'm not that man anymore." For a moment he thought he saw a softening in Samantha's eyes. But then she shook her head, her expression hardening once more. "It's too late for apologies, Jonathan. You can't just walk back into our lives and expect everything to be okay. Those boys, they're my whole world. I've raised them, loved them, been there for every skinned knee and every nightmare. Where were you?" The words hit Jonathan like a physical blow. He knew she was right, knew that he had missed so much. But he was here now, trying to make amends. "I'm here now," he said softly, "and I want to be a part of their lives. Please, Samantha, give me a chance to be the father they deserve." Samantha was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the tabletop. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "And what about Vivian? Where does she fit into all of this?" It was the question Jonathan had been dreading, the one he had been avoiding even in his own thoughts, because the truth was he didn't know. Vivian was his fiancée, the woman he had planned to spend his life with. But now, faced with the reality of his children, everything had changed. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know that my priority right now is my relationship with my sons." Samantha nodded slowly, as if coming to a decision. "Okay," she said, "I'm willing to try and work something out, but on one condition." "Anything," Jonathan said, hope looming in his chest. "Vivian stays away from the boys. At least for now. They're confused enough as it is. They don't need her complicating things further." Jonathan hesitated. He knew Vivian wouldn't take this well, but as he looked at Samantha, saw the love and fierce protectiveness in her eyes, he knew what he had to do. "Agreed," he said. As they left the cafe, Jonathan felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to be the father he should have been from the beginning. But as he watched Samantha walk away, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. Between Vivian's ambitions, Samantha's distrust, and his own conflicted feelings, Jonathan knew he was walking a tightrope. One wrong move and everything could come crashing down. Vivian Caldwell strode into Jonathan's office, her stilettos clicking against the polished hardwood floor. Her presence commanded attention, from her impeccably tailored suit to her sharp, calculating gaze. She was the epitome of power and ambition, a woman who knew what she wanted and wouldn't hesitate to take it. "Jonathan, darling," she purred, leaning across his desk to plant a kiss on his cheek. "I heard the most interesting rumor today." Jonathan stiffened, his hand pausing over the document he'd been signing. "Oh," he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Vivian's smile was razor-sharp, something about a custody battle. "4 little boys who look remarkably like you." For a moment, Jonathan considered denying it. But he knew better than to lie to Vivian. She had ways of uncovering the truth that were both impressive and terrifying. "It's true," he admitted with a sigh. "I have sons, quadruplets, with Samantha." Vivian's eyes narrowed, a flash of anger crossing her face before she smoothed it away. "I see. And when were you planning on telling me about this development?" "I only found out recently myself," Jonathan explained, running a hand through his hair. "I'm still trying to process it all." Vivian circled the desk, perching on the edge next to Jonathan. Her hand came to rest on his shoulder, a gesture that was both comforting and possessive. "Darling, you know I only want what's best for you, for us. These children, they could complicate things." Jonathan looked up at her, confusion evident in his eyes. "Complicate things? Vivian, they're my children." "Of course they are," she said soothingly. "But think about it, Jonathan. We're on the verge of greatness. The merger with global tech is just around the corner. Your father is talking about stepping down, paving the way for you to take over as CEO. Do you really want to jeopardize all that for some unexpected additions to your life?" Her words sent a chill down Jonathan's spine. He had always admired Vivian's ambition, her drive to succeed. It was one of the things that had drawn him to her in the first place. But now, hearing her talk about his children as if they were nothing more than an inconvenience, he felt a flicker of doubt. "They're not just additions, Vivian," he said, his voice firmer now. "They're my sons. I have a responsibility to them." Vivian's grip on his shoulder tightened slightly. "Of course you do, darling. I'm not suggesting you abandon them. But there are ways to handle this discreetly. A generous financial arrangement with Samantha, perhaps, enough to ensure the children are well cared for, without disrupting our lives." Jonathan shook his head, standing up and moving away from Vivian's touch. "No, I want to be a part of their lives. I want to know them, to be their father." For a moment Vivian's mask slipped, revealing a flash of fury that made Jonathan take a step back. But then it was gone, replaced by a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Swell then," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "I suppose we'll just have to make this work, won't we? After all, what kind of stepmother would I be if I didn't embrace your children?" As she sashayed out of his office, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that he had just entered into a dangerous game. Vivian's motivations were clear. She wanted power, status, and Jonathan by her side as she climbed to the top. The children were an obstacle in her path, one she would do her best to remove or control. He sank back into his chair, his mind racing. He loved Vivian, or at least he thought he did, but for the first time he found himself questioning whether her ambitions aligned with his newfound desire to be a father. As he stared out the window at the Boston skyline, Jonathan realized he was standing at a crossroads. The path he chose would not only determine his future, but the future of his children as well. And somehow he knew that Vivian would not make that choice an easy one. The marketing firm's office buzzed with activity as Samantha hurried to her desk, balancing a stack of files and a large coffee. She was running late again after Jack had woken up with a fever and she'd had to scramble to find a last-minute sitter. "Cutting it close, aren't we, Samantha?" Victoria's cool voice cut through the noise. Samantha's boss stood by her desk, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of disapproval and barely concealed disdain. "I'm sorry, Victoria," Samantha said, setting down her things. "There was an issue with—" "Save it," Victoria interrupted, holding up a hand. I need the Johnson proposal on my desk by noon. Think you can manage that without any distractions?" The emphasis on the last word made Samantha's cheeks burn. She knew exactly what Victoria meant by distractions. It was no secret that Samantha was a single mother to 4 young boys, a fact that seemed to be a constant source of irritation for her boss. "Of course," Samantha replied, forcing a smile. "I'll have it ready." As Victoria walked away, Samantha overheard her mutter to another employee, "This is why I prefer to hire people without baggage." Samantha's hands clenched into fists under her desk, but she took a deep breath and focused on her computer screen. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with 4 growing boys to support and mounting legal fees from the custody battle. Throughout the morning, Samantha worked furiously on the proposal, barely taking a moment to breathe. She was determined to prove Victoria wrong, to show that being a mother didn't make her any less capable or dedicated to her job. As the deadline approached, Samantha put the finishing touches on the document. She felt a surge of pride. It was some of her best work, innovative and thorough. She printed it out and made her way to Victoria's office, knocking softly on the door. "Come in," Victoria called. Samantha entered, holding out the proposal. "The Johnson proposal, as requested. I've included some additional market research that I think will really strengthen our pitch." Victoria took the document, flipping through it with a raised eyebrow. "Aim," she murmured, neither approval nor disapproval in her tone. "We'll see if it's up to standard. You can go." As Samantha turned to leave, Victoria spoke again. "Oh, and Samantha, the team is staying late tonight to prepare for tomorrow's presentation. I expect everyone to be here." Samantha's heart sank. She had promised the boys she'd be home for dinner, had planned a special meal to make up for her absence that morning. "Victoria, Is there a problem?" Victoria's tone was icy. Samantha hesitated. She could feel the eyes of her co-workers on her, waiting to see what she would do. She thought of her boys, waiting at home for her, but she also thought of the bills piling up on her kitchen table, of the custody battle looming over her head. "No," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "No problem, I'll be here." Victoria nodded, a smug smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Good, that's what I like to see, dedication." As Samantha walked back to her desk, she could hear the whispers of her co-workers. "How does she manage with 4 kids at home? I bet those children are neglected. She should really consider finding a man to help her out." Each comment was like a knife to her heart, but Samantha held her head high. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. During her lunch break, Samantha hid in a bathroom stall, calling Mrs. Rodriguez to ask if she could keep the boys for dinner. The kind woman agreed, her voice full of sympathy, and Samantha felt a wave of guilt wash over her. As she hung up the phone, Samantha caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired, worn down. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she didn't have to constantly prove herself, where being a mother wasn't seen as a liability. But then she straightened her shoulders, fixed her hair, and plastered on a smile. She had 4 little boys depending on her, 4 reasons to keep fighting. No amount of discrimination or judgment could take that away from her. As she walked back to her desk, Samantha made a silent promise to herself and to her sons. She would find a way to balance it all, to be the mother her boys deserved and the professional she knew she could be. And one day she would be in a position where she could ensure that no other working mother had to face the kind of discrimination she was experiencing. For now, though, she had work to do. Samantha sat down at her desk, took a deep breath, and dove back into her tasks. She was a mother, a professional, and a fighter, and she wasn't about to let anyone forget it. The courthouse loomed before Samantha, an imposing structure of stone and glass that seemed to mock her with its grandeur. She took a deep breath, smoothing down her second-hand suit and squaring her shoulders. This was it, the culmination of months of preparation, sleepless nights and endless worry, a custody hearing that would determine the future of her family. As she climbed the steps, she felt a gentle hand on her arm. Rachel, her best friend and lawyer, stood beside her, a fierce determination in her eyes. "We've got this, Sam," Rachel said, her voice low and confident. "Those boys belong with you, and we're going to make damn sure the judge sees that." Samantha nodded, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. Together, they pushed through the heavy doors and into the bustling hallway beyond. The courtroom was already packed when they entered. Samantha's eyes immediately found Jonathan sitting at the defendant's table with his high-priced lawyer. He looked impeccable in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled. For a moment, Samantha felt a pang of self-consciousness about her own appearance, but she pushed it aside. She was here for her boys, nothing else mattered. As they took their seats, Samantha noticed Vivian slip into the back row of the gallery. The other woman's presence sent a chill down her spine. Vivian's cold eyes met Samantha's, a smirk playing at the corners of her perfectly painted lips. The message was clear: this was war, and Vivian intended to win. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, called the court to order. "We are here today to determine custody arrangements for Jack, James, Jason, Jesse Carter," she announced, her voice echoing in the suddenly silent room. Let's begin with opening statements." Jonathan's lawyer stood first, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a voice like smooth whiskey. "Your Honor," he began, "my client, Jonathan Carter, is a successful businessman and upstanding member of the community. He has the means and the desire to provide these 4 young boys with every opportunity life has to offer. While it's true that he was unaware of their existence for the first 3 years of their lives, he has shown nothing but dedication and love for his sons since discovering their existence." The lawyer paused, his eyes sweeping the courtroom. "We will prove that it is in the best interest of these children to have their father play a significant role in their lives. Mr. Carter is seeking joint custody with the children spending equal time in both parents' homes, and he can offer them stability, financial security, and the guidance of a father figure that every child needs." As he sat down, Samantha felt her heart racing. The lawyer's words painted such a rosy picture of life with Jonathan. Would the judge see through it? Rachel stood next, her petite frame belying the power in her voice. "Your Honor, Samantha Blake has been the sole caregiver for these 4 boys since the day they were born. She has sacrificed everything, her career, her personal life, her very identity, to ensure that Jack, James, Jake, and Jesse have a loving and stable home." Rachel's voice grew passionate as she continued. "Ms. Blake has raised these children alone, without a penny of support from Mr. Carter. She has worked multiple jobs, scrimped and saved, and poured every ounce of her being into being both mother and father to her sons. The bond between Miss Blake and her children is unbreakable, forged through years of love, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication." "Excuse me." Samantha felt tears pricking at her eyes as Rachel spoke. She blinked them back, determined to stay strong. "We will demonstrate that uprooting these children from the only home they've ever known, forcing them to split their time between 2 households, would be detrimental to their well-being. Ms. Blake is not seeking to exclude Mr. Carter from the children's lives, but rather to maintain the stability and security that has allowed these boys to thrive thus far." As Rachel took her seat, Samantha squeezed her hand in silent thanks. The battle lines had been drawn. What followed was a parade of witnesses and experts, each side presenting their case with meticulous detail. Jonathan's team brought in child psychologists who spoke about the importance of father figures in child development. They presented financial records showing Jonathan's considerable wealth and the luxurious lifestyle he could provide for the boys. Samantha's side countered with their own experts, emphasizing the critical bond between mother and child, especially in the early years. They brought in the boys' preschool teacher, who spoke glowingly of their development and Samantha's involvement in their education. Throughout it all, Samantha sat rigid in her chair, her eyes often darting to the back of the courtroom where Vivian sat, always watching, always calculating. The other woman's presence was a constant reminder of what Samantha stood to lose if things didn't go her way. As the day wore on, tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch. Finally, it was time for Samantha and Jonathan to take the stand. Jonathan went first, his voice steady as he described his shock at discovering he had children, his regret at missing the first years of their lives, and his determination to be a good father moving forward. He had made a terrible mistake 4 years ago, he admitted, his eyes finding Samantha's across the courtroom. I was young and scared, and I ran away from my responsibilities. But I'm here now, and I want nothing more than to be the father these boys deserve. Samantha felt a lump form in her throat at his words. Part of her wanted to believe him, to think that he had truly changed, but the memory of his betrayal, of the years of struggle that followed, was still too raw. When it was Samantha's turn to testify, she took a deep breath, steeling herself. No, this was a chance to make the judge understand, to fight for her family. Your Honor, she began, her voice trembling slightly before gaining strength. I have loved those boys from the moment I knew they existed. When Jonathan left me pregnant and alone, I could have given up, but I didn't. I chose to fight, to give my children the best life I could possibly provide. She described the sleepless nights, the financial hardships, the countless sacrifices she had made. But more than that, she spoke of the joy her sons brought her, of the unbreakable bond they shared. They are my world, Samantha said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Everything I do, every decision I make is with their well-being in mind. I'm not trying to keep Jonathan out of their lives, but I am trying to protect the stability and security they've always known. As Samantha stepped down from the witness stand, she felt drained but oddly empowered. And she had spoken her truth, laid bare her heart for all to see. Whatever happened next, she knew she had fought with everything she had. The judge called for a recess to review all the evidence before making her decision. As the courtroom emptied, Samantha found herself face to face with Jonathan in the hallway. For a moment they simply stared at each other, years of hurt and regret hanging between them like a physical presence. Samantha, Jonathan began, his voice low. I meant what I said in there. I want to make this right. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. She saw the regret in his eyes, the determination, but also the uncertainty. This man, who had once been her whole world, now felt like a stranger. It's not about making things right between us, Jonathan, she said softly. It's about what's best for the boys. Can you honestly say that uprooting their lives, forcing them to shuttle between two homes, is what's best for them? Before Jonathan could respond, Vivian appeared at his side, her hand possessively gripping his arm. Come along, darling, she purred. We should discuss strategy with the lawyer before the judge returns. As Jonathan allowed himself to be led away, Samantha couldn't help but notice the conflict in his eyes. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps he was as trapped in this situation as she was. The recess seemed to stretch on forever. Samantha paced the hallway, her mind racing with all the possible outcomes. Rachel tried to distract her with talk of legal precedents and statistics, but Samantha could barely focus. Finally, they were called back into the courtroom. Samantha's heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it as the judge prepared to deliver her verdict. After careful consideration of all the evidence presented, the judge began, her voice solemn, I have come to a decision regarding the custody of Jack, James, Jake and Jesse Carter. Samantha held her breath, her hand gripping Rachel's so tightly her knuckles turned white. While I believe that both parents have the children's best interests at heart, I must consider what arrangement will provide the most stability and continuity for these young boys. Therefore, I am awarding primary physical custody to Ms. Samantha Blake. A wave of relief washed over Samantha. So powerful she felt her knees go weak, but the judge wasn't finished. However, I also believe it is in the children's best interest to have a relationship with their father, that Mr. Jonathan Carter will have visitation rights to be increased gradually as the children adjust. Parties will share legal custody, making joint decisions about the children's education, healthcare, and other major life choices. As the judge continued to outline the specifics of the custody arrangement, Samantha's eyes found Jonathan's across the courtroom. His face was a mask of conflicting emotions, disappointment, relief, and something that looked almost like respect. But it was Vivian's reaction that truly caught Samantha's attention. The other woman's face was contorted with fury, her eyes blazing as she glared daggers at Samantha. In that moment, Samantha knew that while she may have won this battle, the war was far from over. As the courtroom began to empty, Samantha felt a tugging on her sleeve. She looked down to see Miss Rodriguez, the kind neighbor who'd been watching the boys during the hearing. "They're asking for you, Mia," the older woman said softly. "They've been so brave, but they need their mama now." Samantha nodded, suddenly desperate to hold her sons. She followed Mrs. Rodriguez out of the courtroom and down the hall to a small waiting area where 4 little boys sat huddled together on a bench. The moment they saw her, their faces lit up. "Mummy," they cried in unison, launching themselves into her arms. Samantha sank to her knees, gathering all 4 of them close. She breathed in their familiar scent, felt the warmth of their small bodies against hers, and finally allowed herself to break down. Tears streamed down her face as she held her sons, murmuring words of love and reassurance. "It's okay, babies," she whispered. "Mummy's here, everything's going to be all right." As she held her children, Samantha knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges to face, adjustments to make. But in this moment, with her sons in her arms, she felt invincible. Whatever came next, they would face it together as a family. From the doorway, Jonathan watched the scene unfold. The sight of Samantha with their sons stirred something deep within him, regret for what he had thrown away, determination to be a part of their lives moving forward, and a dawning realization that perhaps he had been fighting for the wrong things all along. As he turned to leave, he found Vivian waiting for him, her face a storm cloud of anger and frustration. "This isn't over," she hissed. "We'll appeal. We'll find a way to." "No," Jonathan interrupted, his voice firm. "No more fighting. This is what's best for the boys." Vivian's eyes widened in disbelief. "What about what's best for us, for our future?" Jonathan looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw the coldness behind her beauty, the ambition that drove her every move. "I think," he said slowly, "that I need to reevaluate what my future looks like." As he walked away, leaving a stunned Vivian in his wake, Jonathan felt as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had a long way to go to prove himself as a father, to earn Samantha's trust and his son's love. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. Back in the waiting room, Samantha continued to hold her boys close, their little voices washing over her as they chattered excitedly about their day. As she listened to their stories, their laughter, she sent up a silent prayer of thanks. They were hers and she was theirs, and together they could face anything. The battle was over, but the journey was just beginning. As Samantha gathered her sons and prepared to take them home, she felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them head-on, with the love of her children as her guiding light. And if you've been moved by Samantha's story of love, sacrifice and triumph, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment with the number 1 to let us know you enjoyed this tale and would like to hear more stories like it. When your feedback helps us bring you the content you love. The weeks following the custody hearing brought a whirlwind of changes for Samantha and her boys. While she had won primary custody, the reality of co-parenting with Jonathan was proving to be a complex and emotionally charged experience. The first weekend visitation arrived all too soon. Samantha stood in the doorway of their small apartment, watching as Jonathan's sleek black sub pulled up to the curb. Her heart clenched as she saw the excitement on her sons' faces. They had been talking non-stop about spending time with their father, and while Samantha was glad they were happy, a part of her couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy and fear. "Be good for your father," she said, kneeling down to straighten Jack's collar and smooth Jessie's wild hair. "Remember, if you need anything, you can call me anytime." "We know, Mummy," Jake said, rolling his eyes in that way that made him seem far older than his 4 years. "You told us 1,000,000 times." Samantha forced a smile, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "I know, sweetie. I just want to make sure you're okay." As Jonathan approached the door, Samantha stood, unconsciously positioning herself between him and the boys. "They've all got their overnight bags," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "James needs his inhaler before bed, and Jesse has a slight allergy to strawberries." Jonathan nodded, his expression a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I've got it all written down," he assured her. "We'll be fine, Samantha." As the boys hugged her goodbye and piled into Jonathan's car, Samantha felt as though a piece of her heart was being ripped away. She stood on the sidewalk long after the car had disappeared from view, fighting back tears. The weekend dragged on endlessly. Samantha found herself wandering through the quiet apartment, the silence oppressive after years of constant noise and activity. She cleaned obsessively, reorganized the boys' room 3 times, and called Rachel twice just to hear a friendly voice. When Sunday evening finally arrived, and she heard the sound of car doors slamming outside, Samantha had to restrain herself from running out to meet them. The boys burst through the door in a flurry of excitement, talking over each other as they recounted their adventures. "Daddy took us to the zoo. We saw lions and tigers and bears. And we had ice cream for dinner. And no." Samantha listened with a forced smile, her eyes scanning her sons for any signs of distress or unhappiness. But all she saw were 4 beaming faces, their eyes bright with joy. As Jonathan lingered in the doorway, Samantha felt a complex mix of emotions. Gratitude that her sons had enjoyed themselves, resentment that Jonathan could swoop in and be the fun parent while she handled the day-to-day struggles, and a lingering attraction that she fought hard to suppress. "They were great," Jonathan said softly, his eyes meeting hers. "You've done an amazing job with them, Samantha." The compliment, so unexpected, caught her off guard. "Thank you," she murmured, unsure how to respond. As Jonathan said his goodbyes and left, Samantha found herself wondering if perhaps this arrangement could work after all. But her cautious optimism was short-lived. The following Wednesday, as Samantha was preparing dinner, her phone rang. It was Jonathan. "Samantha," he said, his voice tight with worry, "James is having trouble breathing. I think it's an asthma attack." Panic gripped her heart. "Where are you?" she demanded, already reaching for her keys. "At my place. I've given him the inhaler, but it doesn't seem to be helping." "I'm on my way," Samantha said, ending the call and rushing out the door, her other 3 boys in tow. The drive to Jonathan's penthouse was a blur. When they arrived, Samantha found James curled up on the couch, his breathing labored and wheezy. Jonathan stood nearby, looking helpless and terrified. Without a word, Samantha went into action. She had dealt with James's asthma attacks before and knew exactly what to do. Within minutes, she had the situation under control, James's breathing slowly returning to normal. As the crisis passed, Samantha became aware of Jonathan watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. "How did you do that?" he asked quietly. "I followed all the instructions, but..." Samantha sighed, suddenly feeling very tired. "It's not just about following instructions, Jonathan. It's about knowing James, understanding his triggers, recognizing the signs before it gets this bad." She saw the hurt flash across his face and immediately regretted her words. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know you're trying. This stuff, it takes time to learn." Jonathan nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I want to learn," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to be a good father to them." For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Samantha felt a genuine connection with Jonathan. She saw in his eyes the same love and fear that she felt every day as a parent. "You will be," she said, surprising herself with her sincerity. "We'll figure this out together." The incident with James marked a turning point in Samantha and Jonathan's co-parenting relationship. They began to communicate more openly, sharing information about the boys' routines, likes and dislikes, and individual quirks. Slowly, tentatively, they started to build a partnership focused on their children's well-being. Just as things seemed to be settling into a new normal, another crisis emerged. The one afternoon, as Samantha was picking the boys up from preschool, she noticed Jesse seemed unusually quiet. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she asked, kneeling down to his level. Jesse's lower lip trembled. "Miss Johnson asked us to draw our families today," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and I didn't know what to draw." Samantha's heart broke. She gathered Jesse into her arms, feeling his small body shake with silent sobs. "Oh, honey," she murmured, struggling to find the right words. "Families come in all shapes and sizes. Ours might be a little different, but that doesn't make it any less special." That night, after the boys were in bed, Samantha called Jonathan. They needed to address this as a united front. To her surprise, Jonathan suggested they meet in person to discuss the issue. The next day they found themselves sitting in a small cafe, an awkward silence stretching between them. "We need to do better," Jonathan said finally, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "For the boys. They're confused, and it's our fault." Samantha nodded, taking a sip of her coffee to buy herself time to respond. "You're right," she admitted. But how do we fix this? We can't exactly go back to being one big happy family." The words came out more bitterly than she intended, and she saw Jonathan wince. "No, we can't," he agreed softly, "but maybe we can find a way to be friends, for the sake of the boys." Samantha stared at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But all she saw was genuine concern and a desire to make things right. "Friends," she repeated, testing the word out. It felt strange considering their history, but not entirely impossible. I think we can try that." As they continued to talk, hashing out plans for family dinners and joint outings with the boys, Samantha felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. But even as she and Jonathan worked to build a new kind of family dynamic, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that something was looming on the horizon. Vivian had been suspiciously quiet since the custody hearing, and Samantha knew better than to believe the other woman had simply given up. As she left the cafe that day, Samantha's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her blood ran cold as she read the message. "Enjoy your little family while you can. This isn't over." Samantha's hand tightened around her phone, her mind racing. She had won the battle for custody, but it was clear that the war was far from over. Whatever Vivian was planning, Samantha knew she would have to be ready. Her family's happiness, so newly and tentatively rebuilt, depended on it. With a deep breath, Samantha straightened her shoulders and walked on. She had faced seemingly insurmountable odds before and come out stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them head-on, with the love of her children as her guiding light, and perhaps with Jonathan by her side as an ally rather than an adversary. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Samantha would stop at nothing to protect her family. The revelation of Jonathan's adoption hit like a thunderbolt, sending shockwaves through the delicate balance they had begun to establish. It happened on a crisp autumn afternoon, during one of the now regular family outings they had started organizing for the boys' benefit. And they were at the park, Jonathan pushing Jack and James on the swings while Samantha helped Jake and Jesse build a sand castle. And the air was filled with the sound of childish laughter and the rustle of falling leaves. It was almost perfect, almost like the family they could have been. Then Jonathan's phone rang. Samantha watched as he stepped away to take the call, his brow furrowing as he listened to whoever was on the other end. When he returned, his face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. "What's wrong?" Samantha asked, immediately concerned. Jonathan shook his head, as if trying to clear it. "That was my mother," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She told me I'm adopted." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Samantha stared at him, unsure how to respond. "Are you sure?" she finally managed to ask. He nodded, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she recognized as a sign of distress. "Apparently they've known all along, but never found the right time to tell me. And now, with all this going on with the boys, they thought I should know." Samantha's mind raced. She thought of all the times Jonathan had spoken about living up to his family name, about the pressure of carrying on the Carter legacy. How much of his life had been built on a foundation of lies? "I don't know who I am anymore," Jonathan said, his voice breaking. In that moment, Samantha saw not the polished businessman or the estranged ex, but a lost and confused man grappling with his very identity. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. "You're still you," she said softly. "You're still Jonathan. You're still the father of our boys." He looked at her, gratitude and something else, something deeper shining in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. As they gathered the boys and headed home, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that everything had shifted once again. Jonathan's revelation had humanized him in a way she hadn't expected, and she found herself seeing him in a new light. Over the next few weeks, Jonathan struggled to come to terms with his newfound identity. He threw himself into researching his biological parents, but every lead seemed to be a dead end. Samantha found herself in the unexpected position of being his confidante and support system. One evening, after the boys were in bed, they sat at a small kitchen table, papers and documents spread out before them. "I just don't understand," Jonathan said, frustration evident in his voice. "Why would they keep this from me for so long? And why tell me now?" Samantha sighed, pushing a mug of coffee towards him. "I don't know, Jonathan, but maybe this is an opportunity." He looked at her quizzically. "An opportunity for what?" "To redefine yourself," she said. "To figure out who you are outside of the Carter name and expectations." Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. "I've spent my whole life trying to live up to an impossible standard," he finally said. "Trying to be the perfect son, the perfect businessman. And for what? A lie." Samantha reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Not everything was a lie. The man you've become, the father you're trying to be for our boys, that's all you, Jonathan. Not the Carter name." He looked at her, really looked at her, and Samantha felt her breath catch in her throat. For a moment, she saw a glimpse of the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "How did you get so wise?" he asked, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. She laughed softly. "Raising quadruplets on your own will do that to you." As Jonathan continued to grapple with his identity crisis, Samantha found herself falling into an unexpected role, that of his support system. She listened as he vented his frustrations, offered advice when he asked for it, and provided a steady presence in the chaos of his emotions. But even as they grew closer, Samantha couldn't forget the pain of the past. She built walls around her heart, determined not to let herself be vulnerable again. Meanwhile, the boys thrived under their parents' united front. They stopped asking confusing questions about their family structure and seemed to accept the new normal with the resilience only children possess. It was during this period of relative calm that Vivian made her move. Samantha was at work when she received an urgent call from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Major," the older woman said, her voice trembling, "there's a woman here. She says she's the boy's stepmother and she's trying to take them." Panic gripped Samantha's heart. "Don't let her near them," she ordered, already grabbing her purse and rushing out of the office. "I'm on my way." "Timmy a fe. Yone a fetch, Wikin." The drive home was a blur of fear and fury. When Samantha arrived, she found Vivian standing on the sidewalk, looking pristine in a designer suit, a smug smile on her face. "What do you think you're doing?" Samantha demanded, positioning herself between Vivian and the apartment building. Vivian's smile widened. "Just paying a visit to my stepsons. Is that a crime?" "It is when you try to take them without permission," Samantha spat. "Stay away from my children, Vivian." "Our children," Vivian corrected smoothly. "Or have you forgotten that I'm marrying their father?" The words hit Samantha like a physical blow. She had been so caught up in supporting Jonathan through his identity crisis that she had almost forgotten about Vivian's place in his life. "Jonathan would never allow this," Samantha said, trying to keep her voice steady. Vivian laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "Oh, Samantha, you really don't know him at all, do you? Jonathan will do whatever I tell him to do. He needs me, especially now with this whole adoption drama." Samantha felt her resolve strengthening. She straightened her spine, meeting Vivian's gaze head-on. "You're wrong," she said firmly. Jonathan is stronger than you think, and so am I. You will not come near my children again. If you try, I will have you arrested for attempted kidnapping. Do you understand?" For a moment, Vivian's mask of confidence slipped, revealing a flash of fear, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a look of cold determination. "This isn't over," Vivian hissed before turning on her heel and stalking away. As soon as she was gone, Samantha rushed into the building, gathering her boys into her arms and holding them tight. They were safe for now, but she knew this was only the beginning. That night, after ensuring the boys were securely tucked in bed, Samantha called Jonathan. When he answered, she could hear the weariness in his voice. "Jonathan," she said, cutting straight to the chase, "we need to talk about Vivian." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Jonathan finally spoke, his voice was heavy with resignation. "I know," he said. "She told me what happened today. Samantha, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she would do something like that." Samantha took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she needed to say next. "Jonathan, I know you're going through a lot right now, but you need to make a choice. Vivian or your children. You can't have both." She heard him inhale sharply. "Samantha, it's not that simple. Vivian, she knows things. About my adoption, about my family. She's threatening to go public with it all if I leave her." The pieces suddenly clicked into place for Samantha. Vivian's smugness, her confidence that Jonathan would do whatever she wanted. She was blackmailing him. "We'll figure it out," Samantha said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "Together. But Jonathan, you have to be willing to fight. For yourself and for our boys." There was another long pause. Then, "Okay," Jonathan said softly. "Okay, tell me what to do." As Samantha began to outline a plan, she felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with legal battles and emotional turmoil, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone in the fight. Whatever Vivian had planned, whatever secret she held, Samantha and Jonathan would face it together, for their boys and for the family they were slowly, cautiously rebuilding. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Samantha and Jonathan worked together to counter Vivian's threats and protect their family. They met with lawyers, private investigators, and even a public relations specialist to prepare for every possible scenario. Throughout it all, Samantha was surprised by Jonathan's newfound strength and determination. The revelation of his adoption seemed to have awakened something in him, a desire to break free from the expectations and manipulations that had controlled his life for so long. One evening, as they sat in Samantha's small living room poring over documents, Jonathan looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "I don't know how to thank you," he said softly, "for standing by me through all of this. I know I don't deserve it after everything I've put you through." Samantha felt a flutter in her chest, but quickly pushed it aside. "We're doing this for the boys," she reminded him and herself. Jonathan nodded, but his gaze lingered on her face. "Still, I want you to know how much I appreciate you, Samantha. You're incredible." Before she could respond, a small voice interrupted them. "Mommy! Dad!" They turned to see Jesse standing in the doorway, his favorite stuffed elephant clutched tightly to his chest. "What is it, sweetheart?" Samantha asked, immediately concerned. "Did you have a bad dream?" Jesse nodded, his lower lip trembling. Without a word, Jonathan stood and scooped the boy into his arms, cradling him close. "It's okay, buddy," he murmured. "Daddy's here. Want to tell me about him?" As Jonathan carried Jesse back to bed, Samantha felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was the father she had always hoped Jonathan would be. Maybe, just maybe, they could make this work after all. The next morning, Samantha received a call from their lawyer. "We've got something," he said, excitement evident in his voice. "A paper trail linking Vivian to some questionable business dealings. It might be enough to neutralize her threats." In tut. Samantha's heart raced as she relayed the information to Jonathan. This could be the break they needed, a way to free Jonathan from Vivian's manipulation and secure their family's future. They agreed to meet with the lawyer that afternoon to discuss their next steps. As Samantha hung up the phone, she felt a surge of hope. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she, Jonathan, and the boys could be a real family. But Vivian had one last card to play. As Samantha was preparing to leave for the meeting, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her blood ran cold as she read the message. "I know your secret. Meet me at the cafe on 5th in 1 hour, or everyone will know what you did." Samantha's hands shook as she stared at the screen. She had buried that secret so deep, had convinced herself that it was in the past. How could Vivian possibly know? For a moment she considered ignoring the message, going to meet Jonathan and the lawyer as planned. The thought of her past coming to light, of losing everything she had fought so hard for, was too much to bear. With a heavy heart, Samantha called Jonathan to tell him she couldn't make the meeting. She hated lying to him, but she couldn't risk him getting involved. This was her burden to bear. An hour later, Samantha sat in the cafe, her heart pounding as she waited for Vivian to arrive. When the other woman finally swept in, looking impeccable as always, Samantha felt a surge of anger and fear. "What do you want, Vivian?" she demanded as soon as the other woman sat down. Vivian's lips curled into a cold smile. Now, Samantha, is that any way to greet an old friend, especially one who knows all about your little indiscretion in college?" Samantha's blood ran cold. "How did you?" "I have my ways," Vivian interrupted smoothly. "The question is, what are you willing to do to keep this information from coming to light? I wonder what Jonathan would think if he knew the truth about the woman raising his children." Samantha's mind raced. The incident in college had been a mistake, a moment of weakness during a difficult time. She had made amends, had worked hard to become the person she was today. But if it came out now, would anyone understand? "What do you want?" Samantha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vivian leaned forward, her eyes glittering with triumph. "It's simple, really. You're going to convince Jonathan to sign over full custody of the boys to me. In return, I'll keep your dirty little secret." Samantha felt as though the air had been sucked out of her lungs. "You can't be serious," she gasped. "Those boys are my life. I won't give them up." "Then I guess you'll have to live with the consequences," Vivian said, standing up. "You have 24 hours to make your decision. Choose wisely, Samantha." As Vivian sauntered out of the cafe, Samantha sat frozen, her mind a whirlwind of fear and desperation. How had it come to this? After everything she had been through, everything she had overcome, was she going to lose it all because of one mistake from her past? She thought of her boys, of their laughter and their love. She thought of Jonathan, of the partnership they had been building. Could she really give it all up? But as the initial shock wore off, something else began to take its place, a fierce determination, a refusal to be bullied or blackmailed. Samantha had fought too hard, had come too far to give up now. With the shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and dialed Jonathan's number. It was time to come clean, to face her past head-on. Whatever happened, she would face it with honesty and courage. As the phone rang, Samantha took a deep breath. The truth might cost her everything, but living in fear of Vivian's threats was no way to live at all. It was time to take control of her own story, for better or for worse. "Jonathan," she said when he answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "There's something I need to tell you. Life often presents us with impossible choices, moments where our past threatens to overshadow our future. Samantha's journey reminds us that true strength lies not in perfection, but in our ability to face our mistakes with courage and honesty. Like Samantha, we all have secrets we fear will define us, shadows we try to outrun. But in the end, it's not our past that determines who we are, but how we choose to move forward. The love of a parent for their child is a force more powerful than any secret, any threat, or any fear. It's a love that can give us the strength to stand up to our demons, to fight for what truly matters. Samantha's decision to tell the truth, despite the potential consequences, speaks to the transformative power of honesty and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. It reminds us that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to be vulnerable, to lay our truths bare and trust in the love of those who matter most. In our darkest moments, when it feels like the world is closing in, remember Samantha's courage. Remember that you are more than your mistakes, more than your fears. You are capable of facing any challenge, of overcoming any obstacle when you stand in your truth and fight for love. Your past does not define you. Your love, your courage, your willingness to fight for what's right, that is what truly matters. Like Samantha, you have the power to write your own story, to choose love over fear, truth over deception. In the end, it's not about being perfect, it's about being real, being brave, and never giving up on the people we love. We want to express our heartfelt gratitude to all of you who have joined us on this emotional journey with Samantha and her family. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. If this story has touched your heart, moved you, or resonated with your own experiences, we'd love to hear from you. Your thoughts and feelings are invaluable to us. They inspire us to continue crafting these compelling narratives that explore the depths of human emotion and resilience. Please take a moment to share your impressions, opinions, or any personal reflections in the comments section below. What part of Samantha's story affected you the most? Did her struggles and triumphs remind you of your own life experiences? Your feedback is the fuel that drives our creativity. It helps us understand what resonates with you and guides us in creating more stories that touch the soul and illuminate the human condition. Remember, every comment, every shared experience, every reaction is a source of motivation for us. It encourages us to dig deeper, to tell more powerful stories, and to continue this journey of emotional storytelling with you. So please let your voice be heard. Share your thoughts, your feelings, your reactions. Your words could be the spark that ignites our next great story. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family. We can't wait to read your comments and to bring you more stories that capture the essence of love, struggle, and triumph of the human spirit.